Hey everyone, I am Stephanie Graves and I am here with Love and Wholeness Weekly, and today we are lucky enough to be talking to Karen Moran. She is an amazing drug and alcohol counselor. She's a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, but she also has a wealth of knowledge about codependency and relational addiction. So I'm just I feel very lucky that we get to kind of pick her brain today and get some answers to kind of learn more about relational addiction and some solutions for how to deal with it. So this first part, we're going to delve into what it is and kind of the problem. And then the second part of the video, we're going to talk about solutions. So the first question that I wanted to ask is, how would you describe codependency?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's really good to be here, by the way. Thanks for having me. And thanks for the great intro. So codependency operates, the definition, that there's a lot of definitions actually. If you look it up, you'll find lots of people trying to frame it with lots of different languages and approach it from different places. And the definition that I work from, that I believe encompasses it best, is when an individual learns and grows up learning a series of behaviors in which they are better equipped to care for others than they are for themselves, to their own self-neglect. So we're not talking about generosity of spirit. Yeah. We're not talking about the thing that kind of is at the heart of humanity, you know, that sense of giving. And I think sometimes the word codependency is overused or misused. Yeah. It's not about kindness. Kindness is lovely. There's nothing pathological about that. It's when I give so much that I have consequences as a result of that giving, that I don't have boundaries and I don't take care of me as well.
So it's like almost like a destructive giving.
Correct.
So we're not nourishing
ourselves. It's a pathological destructive giving. And beyond that, it isn't simply about feeling good when other people are doing well and wishing to be a part of that. It's also compulsively needing to, meaning if I don't do for you, if I see you struggling, I'm so uncomfortable with that I must do something to keep you from struggling. And if I don't, I will suffer.
Yeah.
I will feel guilty. I have a sense of responsibility to run to the rescue. Maybe not everybody, not every codependent does that kind of willy-nilly. Yeah. Some are very specific to a relationship, like maybe I'm the mother and it's my daughter. Yeah. Or maybe I'm the daughter and it's my mother. Yeah. Or, I mean, it certainly can exist in pockets.
Yeah. And then I did want to ask about the rescue thing. So, like, because I noticed that that's a big thing. Like, there's this person that I want to rescue because they can't, I deem them unable to take care of themselves.
Sure.
But can you give a little bit of an idea of what that is about or where that comes from?
Well, I think many people who have that experience, who understand that experience, I don't know that those of us that have participated in that behavior see it as disrespectful comes to mind when I think about. I don't know that a lot of people who engage in codependent behaviors think about it as a lack of faith in the person that they're rescuing.
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of an aha moment for many people when they come to understand, like, oh, that is the message, right? If I'm doing for you something you actually are capable of doing for yourself, and if you're not capable of doing it for yourself, you probably should learn to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And if I do it for you, you're not going to learn to do that for yourself. So it really is removing an opportunity for someone to grow and stretch, to squelch my own discomfort. Because when I see you struggle, I struggle.
Yeah.
So really, when I do for you in those moments, I not only take away your struggle, but I'm doing it to quiet my insides.
Yeah.
It might look generous, but let me assure you, it is self-serving.
Yeah. And that might have to do with being used to that role, because of growing up around someone that, like an addict or alcoholic maybe, that could not take care of themselves properly.
Sure. It's born out of it's born out of necessity often. It's And it also, it's hard to discuss this pattern without talking about the self-esteem component.
Yeah.
And the idea that I may believe, and I may operate from a core belief that I'm not consciously aware of, perhaps, or maybe I am, but a core belief that this is the only value I have in a relationship.
Right.
And if I don't do for you, you're not going to stay.
Yeah.
You're going to see that I don't bring anything else to the party.
Yes. I totally understand that feeling. That, like, if I don't do these things, then why would you
purpose?
be with me?
What's my value? Where do, what my worthiness, my sense of being enough in a relationship, all by my lonesome, without having to make it easier on my partner so that they'll be convinced that they should stay.
Yeah. Yeah, because they'll need to.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask, what is sex and love addiction, and is it tied to trauma?
Okay, so sex and love addiction you define on your website, and it's remind me again, what does it say about it?
It defines it as the compulsion to engage in or avoid sexual and emotional attachment.
Correct.
So, like, relationships.
Yes.
Romantic relationships.
Romantic relationships. And so, for individuals who have dependency attachments in relationships, or are intimate avoidance, they are afraid of being seen, known, and maybe they're in touch with the fear, maybe they're not. But one of the things that's obvious in an avoidant is that they are avoidant. So, right? So there is within the fellowship of Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, there are people who come to that program from different orientations around this issue. And I like to think of it as a thermometer, if you will. That over here we have the dependent, the person who must be in a romantic partnership, a sexual partnership, or a romantic one, in order to feel complete, and to feel safe. And then there's the other end of the thermometer, is the person who has a wall so high you're never getting in. Right. And oftentimes these two people end up in relationship with one another, where one is chasing and the other is running. That's not at all an uncommon dynamic. And I would say that it does have implications with trauma history. Yeah. And I use that word, not everybody identifies with that word. So let me unpack that a bit.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
So let's say, for example, that I'm an individual who grew up in a family where affection wasn't shown. You know, maybe it wasn't an abusive household. Maybe my parents were fine, and I had plenty of food and clothes, and all the things that I needed were there. But nobody really expressed affection. Nobody really hugged. Nobody really said I love you. Yeah. What we know is that all children have the same basic needs. And part of those needs is the need for affection, the need for a sense of belonging, and a sense of being valued. That's where, as children, that's where we get our foundation for our sense of who we are, and what we deserve. So if I don't, it's very hard to measure what you don't get. So that's why I don't like to use the word trauma in talking about this, although the outcome can be quite measurable. Right. And an individual who doesn't know how to be loving, doesn't know how to express or receive love. Well, as children, we grow up, and that part of us stays. Yeah. And so we become adults, and we sometimes lose. Many times we lose the context of what that was like for us. Yeah. So we go into our adult relationships the same way all of us do, only we are less equipped to know how to connect intimately in a healthy way. And so we either set ourselves up by choosing people that are reminiscent of our past, so people who are not affection givers, and we might have this craving for it that never got satisfied when we were young. So we are adults now who desperately need to hear "I love you" or be hugged a lot, or and oftentimes we pick partners that are more reminiscent of the players that initially withheld.
Yeah.
And so that reinforces a feeling of unworthiness.
Mhm.
And it's like we spend our adult lives hunting down somebody who can correct that experience for us, and we never quite get there.
Yeah. So, and I did want to reiterate, so even neglect can be considered a traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
Neglect. So that means not the fact that you didn't receive something can be trauma, not just having an action done to you.
I will say that my experience has taught me that individuals who have an absent wound have a very hard time calling that trauma.
Yeah.
Oftentimes compare it to the Lifetime movie of the week where somebody's been horribly brutalized.
Yeah.
And there's the big T trauma, if you will.
Mhm.
It is hard to measure what you didn't get.
Mhm.
And so most people who have absent wounds, missing pieces, things that weren't quite, basic needs met in terms of the obvious, but this missing component. Those are the individuals, I think, that have the hardest time naming it that.
Yeah.
And really understanding why those patterns of behavior in adulthood keep happening. Those are the individuals that often feel kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And don't
Yeah,
understand.
they're like, nothing happened.
Right. Nothing that would seem obvious from outer space. Right?
Yeah. 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 So I'm really glad that you talked about that. Okay, do you think it's common for people in recovery from alcohol and drugs to struggle with relational addiction?
I do. When you think about all of our relationships stemming from our relationship with ourselves, right? How I treat me, what I believe my value and worth is, as we've talked about earlier. It has been suggested, Dr. Gabor Mate is who comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of famous for saying, he's a physician and addictionologist in Vancouver, Canada, and he talks about addiction as being a result of painful connection.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think of it in those terms, what he says is the solution for addiction isn't necessarily into and unto itself purely abstinence. The solution is connection. And for people who are getting clean and sober from substances, connecting is the very thing that they're tasked with.
Yeah.
Because a function of addiction is to engage in behaviors that we're not proud of, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we walk around with this belly full of shame and regret that compounds for many of us what we already believed about ourselves in terms of unworthiness.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have this insult to injury moment. And the next step, once kind of the fog lifts and sobriety is achieved, is people begin thinking about partnerships and
Mm-hmm.
connections. And that's right on cue. It's just that being clean doesn't mean I now know how to navigate human intimacy. And it also doesn't mean I'm no longer full of shame and self-doubt.
Yeah.
So I think that this dialogue is a very common one for people at a certain point in their sobriety, that it's next on the menu.
Yeah.
The relationship with self, the relationship with others. As a matter of fact, it's referred to in the book Stage 2 Recovery as being the next thing, the next stage.
Mm-hmm. It's learning how to have healthy intimacy.
Correct. First with self. And
Yes.
then with
Mm-hmm.
others, because whatever I bring to you is what I have for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't bring to you something I don't have inside of me for myself.
Yeah. So if we're completely depriving, neglecting, mistreating ourselves,
Correct.
there's no way that we can enter into a healthy attachment.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know how to oftentimes. I haven't learned.
Yeah.
How to love myself. When you talk about an individual who gets clean and sober, arguably the substance was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that it was the problem is a bit of a stretch, really. In fact, when people get clean and sober, what they've done is taken away a solution.
Yeah. You have
problem
to substitute
still
it. Yeah.
exists. And so when we talk about sex and love addiction, as well as eating disorders or gambling addiction or shopping addiction or, you know, all of the multitude of cross addiction issues, that's a function of that hole in the soul experience. I still need something. You take away my primary drug and it leaves a gaping void.
Yeah.
I still need something to feel whole.
Yeah.
And so for sex and love addicts, it is common that people in early recovery hook up and then have incredibly chaotic rides.
Yeah.
Because what you end up having often in 12-step recovery are two people in that situation, and it's like adding gasoline and fire.
Yeah.
Because neither person has healed thoroughly in their primary wounded ways.
Yeah.
To bring themselves to that relationship.
Yeah.
So what they do is they bring their need.
Yeah.
They bring their need to that relationship, and they look to their partner and they say, oh, where have you been all my life? You know, my substances are gone and now I need something to make me okay.
Yeah.
And guess what? That's going to be you.
Yeah.
You know, like,
and to me, I kind of picture it being like two people that can barely stand on their own trying to like help each other stand up or something.
Sure.
Because really, like, and when I think of like a healthier connection, it would be like two people standing on their own, like being able to stand on your own, and then you stand together because you choose that.
Sure. Well, it's demonstrated best, I think, as the difference between this and a healthy attachment.
Right.
You know, there's dependence, there's codependence, there's enmeshment, and then there's interdependence, where we lean, but we don't carry.
Yes, I love that. I love that. We lean, but we don't carry, because it's hard carrying somebody else. It's like especially when you don't know how to take care of yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, and so what about people who are not an addict? They're not an alcoholic, but they grew up around an addict or an alcoholic or dysfunction in their childhood. Can they struggle with relationships the same way?
Well, sure, for all the reasons that I just said. So they learned, if you will, at the feet of the masters, which is what we all do at our parents' modeling. And as children, we are sponges, so we absorb everything. All the messages were designed biologically to not miss a beat. And so we are learning from our parents first and foremost, by their presence or absence, about connection. And if I have unmet needs, which I do, if I grew up in a family where there was addiction or something that distracted the parents from their primary job of parenting.
Right.
Whatever that can be. That can be addiction, but it can be lots of other things.
Yeah.
Anything that kept the parents from being able to be present in healthy parent ways, whether by their own design or as a function of just life, leaves an empty space for the child. And so some of those children grow into people who find substances to fill that space.
Yeah.
Or food, or perfection, or the care of others, or relationships. So some of those individuals, well, all of them take into adulthood need.
Yeah.
And not all of them fill the need in the same way.
Exactly.
So it really doesn't matter if the person becomes chemically dependent or simply purely codependent or a sex and love addict or whatever.
Yeah.
The idea is that the process is the same, as we seek something outside of ourselves to fix what's broken within.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what the something is. You can fill in the blank. Whatever it is for you is what it is.
Yeah. I like that she said perfection, because I think people forget that sometimes. Alright, so that concludes this part of the video where we were talking about the problem. The next video is going to be part 2, and it's going to focus on solutions. So I hope you stay tuned, and thanks for joining us at Love and Wholeness Weekly.
Thank you.